Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting the channel via PayPal or Patreon. You'll find the links in the video description. I'm delighted to say that my new book on the Kalashnikov Sicilian has just been published by New in Chess in collaboration with Chessable. So this is the book version of my Chessable online course. So what are the differences between the book and the online course? Well, first and foremost, the medium. There's certainly something very appealing about the Chessable format, this kind of gamification of learning and opening. But for an overview, many find the book form a lot easier, where with a quick flick of the page, one can appreciate how material is laid out and how much attention is devoted to different sections. I've simplified some sections in the book and improved some variations based on feedback. I've also included a few theoretically significant games that were played since the course was published online in the autumn. And I've also added a few more model games in the first section. So I've structured the book according to how I learn an opening. So the first section comprises model games where I explain opening and middle game strategy. I believe that only by examining complete games can we really get a good idea of what an opening is all about. You'll learn about Liberation Station, the bad bishop bounce, the breakout bishop, the Trojan horse, the minority attack, and many other strategies that will help you navigate your way through the middle game. And I've had a lot of really nice feedback from those that have actually bought the online course, saying that these sort of landmarks are really helpful in learning about middle game strategy. And the second section of the book comprises the detailed repertoire for black. And there you can fill in the gaps in your knowledge. I always think a good way of learning an opening is actually to play it with a bit of prep, but then just to play it and then to look up the theory afterwards. And the repertoire section can simply be used as a reference manual to do exactly that. So, does this stuff work? Well, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and I was delighted to receive a game played by someone who actually bought the Chessable course, the online course, and then played the opening and put some of the ideas into practice. So, this game was played by Ryan Duffy, who's a club player from Newcastle upon Tyne. It's a great city in the northeast of England. I should say Newcastle. It really is a fabulous place. I was last there in the autumn at St James's Park to see the game Newcastle against Brentford. A brilliant game. And it is such an amazing city. Anyway, Ryan plays for Forest Hall Chess Club, and he played this training game against a friend of his, and it's a really good example of the Kalashnikov in practice. White played, you could say, the main line of the Kalashnikov, or one of the main lines. C4 is the other most popular move here, and that takes the game in slightly different positions. But knight c3 is one of the most popular lines, and in fact this follows the main line of the course. So bishop e7. So this is the sort of modern way of playing the Kalashnikov. Previously, b5 was the main line, but bishop e7 is quite subtle. So basically, black is preparing to play knight f6, but you don't want to allow the pin. That's the point. So knight c4, the knight bounces back into the middle. b5 gets pushed to e3. The move b5 can be very useful indeed to initiate some kind of minority attack on the queen side. So now at knight f6. And here, well, white needs to bring his king to safety at some moment. I mean, there are lots of ways for white to play this position, but g3 is very sensible. Putting the bishop on g2, supporting the e-pawn, which gives white even more control over the d5 square. Now, there are principally two ways of playing this position for black. You can just castle, and I discuss that in the book. And that's a sort of quieter way, more positional way of playing the position. And the other move that I discuss is pawn to h5. Yes, we fling Harry into the position. Harry is launched down the board. And I think this game proves that this move can often sow real confusion in the enemy camp. So straight away, white has a dilemma. You know, do you ignore this? Or do you block it with h4? Or do you play h3? So which should you do? Well, in this case, white played bishop g2. And the pawn rolled on. It's actually debatable which is the best move, actually, after h5. They all have their pros and cons. And white castles. Okay, white is just saying, okay, I'm not worried about an attack here. You know, it's going to be extremely difficult for black to actually bring the queen to the h file, and this is true. However, one never knows when black is going to exchange on g3, maybe push to h3. Depends what else is going on in the position. Now, in my repertoire in the book, I actually give the move rook b8. Here, Ryan played bishop e6, which I think is a little bit inaccurate, but it works out really well. Normally, this is the square for the bishop. It's a great square. Looks really chunky. Here I think it's a little bit inaccurate, but the move I actually recommend is rook b8. And I just want to show you one line very quickly with rook b8, which I think is really nice. So knight d5, white finally occupies the d5 square. Black exchanges off. And now, I mean, knight takes is quite possible. Pawn takes also possible. But I just want to show you this move, e takes d5. So pushing the knight. And now there's a slight danger. This knight could be trapped with c3 because the f5 square is now covered by these two pieces. But g6 is fine. c3. We're actually following a game, Willow against Pert, from the British Championship 2019. And I feature this game in the model games section. Actually, the knight is absolutely secure on f5. And now a4. Now, in this game I mentioned, in fact, Nick Pert exchanged on g3, which led to a very nice win. But I think it's even stronger to take on a4. And just watch this variation. This is really nice. So if bishop takes, then rook takes pawn. That's safe pawn. So queen takes, bishop d7. Now that attacks the rook. If rook takes pawn, then bishop b5. So the rook goes back. Now I really like this next move for black. Queen c8. Guards the pawn, but also starts to look down this diagonal. Bishop h3 could be a very nice attacking move. So b3 is a very plausible move. So now the bishop can move. And here is the maneuver that I absolutely love, which is so common in the Kalashnikov. Bishop d8. And that bishop is going to bounce out to the b6 square. And it shoots down towards the king. And in combination with pawn takes pawn and bishop h3, well, actually white's king comes under a terrible attack. Now, in the book and the online course, I describe this as the bad bishop bounce. You know, everyone talks about this bishop, this dark square bishop being the bad bishop because it's sort of shut in by the pawns. But actually, once it bounces out to b6, it is a monster of an attacking piece. It looks great on that diagonal. Now, bear that maneuver in mind, the bad bishop bounce, and let's look at the game. So bishop e6 was played. And here I think the best move is knight d5. And, well, it's a really double-edged position. I think, you know, black can just castle like this and just embed that pawn on h3. And if the position ever opens, then the king could be in trouble. But I think that's probably the best way for white to play. But instead of that, white played knight f5. It's a tempting move, but this was exchanged off. And then rook c8. So that is a fantastic bishop, it's got to be said. But, you know, black has counterplay here. You know, this knight coming into d4. And black still has this rock solid center that, you know, is so common in the Kalashnikov. And when you have a more or less fixed pawn structure, as in so many variations of the Kalashnikov, it's easier to get a handle on strategy, because if the pawn structure is the same, you know roughly where you want to place your pieces. Now, knight e4 was played, and, well, I mean, here there are lots of ways to play. I think it's quite interesting to exchange here, but knight d4 played, very tempting to try and take this pawn. And this is what happened. c3, knight takes f5, knight takes f6, bishop f6. And here, white is a pawn down. But I think because of this raking bishop, white does have some compensation. I think the best move for white here is to play a4 to break open the rook's file. And it's just a very double-edged position. But instead, white played g4. It's an understandable move because, you know, there's this idea of exchanging and opening the h-file and even perhaps getting some attack on this diagonal. And that's a constant worry for white. So I can understand why g4 was played. But actually after this, in h3, I think white's king is in a bit of trouble. You know, things have opened up very nicely. Black can use this h4 square. But still, very double-edged position. Bishop b7. And here, black played rook c7. I think the best move is just to go for it with knight h4. Not worrying about losing the exchange. White has to watch out for this pawn, so queen takes pawn is impossible. And if f3, then queen e6. And I think black just has tremendous compensation for the exchange. Black is ready to castle. These wonderful centre pawns can begin to roll down the board. And white's king, because of that pawn on h3, is permanently weak. You know, it's just very open indeed. And yeah, we might even see a bad bishop bounce in this kind of position as well. It's potentially on the cards. Great compensation for black. I think that's the best move. But rook c7 played. White took on a6. And now king f8. So this preempts bishop takes b5 check. So it's a very creative move and leaves the rook on the h-file. You could castle, but leaving on the rook on the h-file is very tempting. I mean, here I think white should take this and go for a4. And we have just a really double-edged position. But instead, white took that knight. I mean, presumably, white was just worried about that knight lurking around the king. Very understandable. But now watch what happens. Queen a8, threatening mate on g2, threatening the bishop on a6. So the queen shot out to g4, covering g2. And it's possible to take this bishop, but black played even better, an even better move. Rook c4, seizing the initiative. And the queen is in trouble, has to guard the g2 square. And if the queen goes back to g3, then bishop h4 is a killer move. Remember, that queen is striking down here, and if queen takes pawn, then obviously black is winning the queen. There you go, justification for leaving the rook on h8. So after rook c4, attacking the queen, white has to play f4. Oof! And now, this diagonal opens. so that when black takes the bishop on a6, things are even worse for white. Rook c4, really nice Zwischenzug. Bishop d2, white desperately trying to develop, bring the rook into play, but frankly, it's too late. Queen b6 check. King goes to h1. Queen b7 check. Checking along here. Queen blocks on f3, but now e4. And that queen has to blockade the e-pawn. And now, okay, I'll have a little slurp of tea. You have a little think about this position. What would you play here if you had black? Black to play. Cheers. What are you going to do? Well, you know what the idea is. It's time to employ the bad bishop bounce. Here we go. That bishop bounces off the back rank, hits the queen. Once the queen is shifted, this diagonal is going to open and white's king is fried in the corner. Watch this. No defense. Bishop e1, bishop b6 pushes the queen out of the way. Queen g3, e3 check. If the king comes here, then e2 is absolutely decisive. If queen f3 blocking the diagonal, then rook takes f4. That rook swings over, and that is absolutely deadly. Mate on f1. Rook f3 played. Rook h4. I mean, that's a beautiful move. Just wonderful. If queen takes, then queen f3 and mate next move. f6. Well, that's a last desperate stab, but g6. a4. I mean, there really is no defense for white here. And rook c takes f4, exploiting that pin again. And that rook is about to disappear. Well, here white resigned. Congratulations to Ryan Duffy on an excellent game. Great to see the bad bishop bounce in action. And in combination with Harry the h-pawn, and the queen on the long diagonal, well, that was just a superb game. You can see how the rook's pawn advance just sowed total confusion in the white camp. Brilliant stuff. So there we go. I'll put the links to the Chessable online course in the video description and also in the comments. And also links to the publisher New in Chess where you can buy the book as well. If you've played a great Kalashnikov like this, then do send it to me and I'll see if I can produce another video. So yeah, let me know. Send them in and do check out the new book. Thank you.